97.3 ESPN.com's Michael Kaskey-Blomain going to join us for the segment here as the Sixers will pick number 1 tomorrow night, Michael. And we know, or we believe, right, is it will be Markelle Fultz. There's nothing to lead us to believe any other reason, any other guy is going to go number 1 to this point, right?
Yeah, I think it would come as a pretty big shock to everyone at this point if Fultz was not the first name called tomorrow night.
All right. You like the move?
Yeah, I do. I like it a lot. I think it was, a good move with not too much risk. He didn't have to give up too much in order to get a guy that, they obviously think would be a great fit with the rest of their guys moving forward. That's what, that's what the assets were for, to make a move when it presented itself. So I think it was good for him to, take advantage of the opportunity.
Right now, this team is in a really interesting spot. It's very exciting. They've got a lot of young pieces, but many unknowns. For you, Michael, what are the realistic expectations with this core group of guys moving forward this season? I mean, do you enter this year saying, man, they better make the playoffs, or do you just hope to see marginal improvement from 28 wins up to maybe, say, 33? What are your expectations now?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that, I would go into the season necessarily saying, they have to make the playoffs. I do think that with the improvement that's kind of expected between the guys from last year that have had a chance to develop, whether that be, Dario or Joel finally getting that experience last year and moving forward, I think that coupled with, the infusion of talent that they're about to get between, Ben Simmons and Fultz and, whoever else they may acquire in free agency, I think that right there in the Eastern Conference right now is enough to propel the team into the playoff picture. So I do expect them to be, competing for a playoff spot. But as far as the perspective, I don't think that's the most important thing. I think this is kind of a season that will really be a foundational season. I mean, obviously, Simmons has never played for the team. Fultz has never played in the league. I think it'll be a really important season for those guys to kind of get their feet wet together and show, show glimpses of what they could really be as a core moving forward.
What do you think of, the job that Colangelo has done? I don't know that, a lot of people were concerned that he was going to try to accelerate things, try to speed back towards the middle. I don't know that he has done that, but what do you think of the job he's done?
Yeah, I don't think he's really done that either, Mike. I've been kind of pleasantly surprised with his approach so far. He seems, kind of conservative with the assets that are in front of him. I think he kind of realizes what a good position the team has been left in by his predecessor. And he has been, pretty smart and calculated with the moves that he's made thus far. I think this Fultz one was obviously the first, real kind of big move that he's made with those assets. And I think, this summer, what he looks to do in free agency and moving forward will continue to shape, obviously his tenure with the team. But I think overall, myself included, and, a lot of other people I think have been, kind of surprised that he hasn't really rushed to, throw together a team that can kind of compete, but is rather, kind of stuck the course out of what was presented before he got here.
Yeah. Of the things that he has done, moving up to the number 1 pick is obviously going to be his kind of signature move, right? This was his kind of, hey, this is my team now. I mean, if everything else in the past, if Sam gave him all of these pieces, this was him saying, okay, Sam, thanks for the pieces. This move is mine, right? This is kind of the move that will define him.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, Mike. And I also think it's the move that will kind of put the, make the stark difference in between the Hinkie regime and the Colangelo regime. This is, it really did feel kind of like a move where he was finally putting his stamp on the team after being here for about, 14 months so far, something like that. I think this was the move that, you can kind of look back and be like, all right, this is where he started to really, put the assets into action and build this team together. I think it was, definitely a move to set the, kind of speed up the course that the team is on now and to, move them in his direction going forward.
Did you think there was a big difference between 3 and 1? I mean, were you like, man, if they can get 1, they got to figure out a way, or were you happy staying at 3?
I was happy staying at 3, but with the way it shook out, I do think this is the ideal scenario for the Sixers. I don't think the talent disparity between 1 and 3 would necessarily be that big, whether it ends up being, a Josh Jackson or a Tatum. I think both of those guys could end up being legit NBA players. But when you're talking about, a need and a fit with a franchise, neither of those guys would have been nearly as good a fit as, Markelle is going to be with the Sixers team as far as addressing a need that this team has needed for years and years, going back, before Michael Carter-Williams all the way back to Iverson. This team has needed a point guard. And when you look around the landscape of the NBA today, pretty much every top team, all the teams competing for a title have, a guy in, that controls the point guard position that was, a high draft pick, an all-star level player. So I think adding that to this team to then complement positions that we already have guys that appear to be good, obviously Embiid at center, Simmons in that kind of pseudo point forward role. I think Fultz just fits in perfectly better than any of the other picks would have. So for that aspect alone, I do think there was a pretty big disparity for the Sixers' sake between 1 and 3.
What happens with Okafor tomorrow night?
That's a great question, Mike. If I had to guess right now, I say we go into Friday with Jahlil Okafor still on the Sixers roster.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think that there's as we all know, I don't think there's a ton of league-wide interest in him, and I don't think that, the team would like to move him, but I don't think that there's necessarily a desperation within the organization to kind of unload him. He's obviously on the team-friendly contract for 2 more years. It's at the point where, no one expects him to be a starter for this team. He's not, one of the top 2, 3, even 4 guys that is going to be looked to for production. If he does return next season, it would obviously be, for some sort of a bench role where he could kind of come in and work against some of the second-tier bigs across the league. And I don't think that in the Sixers' mind that would be the worst thing, for him or for the organization. So, I mean, he'll certainly be available in trade talks, potentially, if they're able to package him with maybe a couple of the second-round picks to move back up into the first round. They would certainly, consider doing something like that, but I don't think that they feel, a desperation to get him moved by tomorrow night.
Can obviously they have 4 second-round picks. Can they put some of them together with Okafor, or does he just not have the value right now?
I do think that could help be enticing offer for a couple other teams. I know that the Chicago Bulls were one team that was rumored to have at least some interest in Ja, obviously his his hometown city. So I think that there's and as I mentioned, the contract for Okafor is another thing that would be kind of enticing to another team. You get a still young and offensively productive big guy on a really team friendly deal for 2 more years. I think that's definitely something that some teams around the NBA, maybe the Pacers, if they have to move on from Paul George and enter sort of a rebuild phase. I think there is a market for him out there. It's just a matter of if what the Sixers see that they will get in return, if they feel like it would be worth it. But I think the most likely scenario, like you said, would be them trying to package maybe that that 36th pick and one of the the lower second round picks along with Ja and maybe along with Nick or something like that to move back into maybe the late lottery or the late teens in the first round.
Talk with Michael Kaskey-Blomain from 97.3 ESPN.com. Read his stuff over there on the Sixers, as you mentioned in an article up there this morning, that Colangelo did mention that just because they have the number 1 pick doesn't mean that they're not going to try to get back into the first round. But do you see them as a player for an established player? Kevin Love's name has come up. It was reported that Jimmy Butler was offered for the 3rd pick, and they decided to go with the 1st pick. But do you see them as a player for somebody of that ilk? One of these veteran players that could be a sign-and trade or something to that effect down the road or even on draft night?
A player, yes. I don't necessarily see it being something that's likely going to happen tomorrow, but from what Bryan said on Monday and from what I've been told, the Sixers are continuing to look at every option. They were supposedly calling into the Knicks about Porzingis when rumors became that he was potentially available. They had They were rumored to be involved in the potential talks between the Bulls and the Cavs that involved, as you mentioned, Kevin Love and Jimmy Butler. So, with the cap space that the Sixers have and the assets that they still have even after making the deal for the first pick, they're obviously a team that can, kind of throw their hat in the ring for a lot of discussions, whether it would be to land a big player or kind of just to be a third team that could, potentially take on a contract or, send out some draft picks. I do think that there's there's certainly a lot of interest on other teams to get the Sixers involved in conversations. So I don't think that them landing a big name guy tomorrow night is likely, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out at this point.
Are you a fan of if you're a Sixers fan and they make a trade for Kevin Love, do you think he fits what they need? I mean, is he a good fit? I mean, I think Love kind of gets a bad rap sometimes because we view him as the guy in Minnesota who was like a 25-point, 14-rebound guy, and in Cleveland, he's just not that guy. I don't know if he is that guy in the future, but if you add Kevin Love, you excited at all?
Yeah, honestly, Mike, I would be excited. I might be in the minority there, but I think Kevin Love, just in general as an NBA player, I do think he gets kind of a bad rap. He's obviously had some struggles in the playoffs, but what he brings to a team, I think, is, it's something that you can clearly see and point your finger to. And as far as the Sixers are concerned, that's the type of guy you could pair next to Embiid and Simmons, and he's just, I think that would be almost an ideal fit as far as a guy that's a stretch four that could spread the floor and help rebound. I think he would, I think he would fit in there nicely. Now, with that being said, I don't know if the team would be willing to, take on that contract, considering that Bryan is kind of stressed that he wants to keep the flexibility open, moving forward. I think they'll be more geared toward trying to land a top-tier guy next summer than they are this summer. But I do think that Love would be a fit, and if that was a trade that ended up shaking out, I think that would be, fans might not be super excited about it at first, but I think once that Kevin was on the floor with guys like Ben and Markelle and Joel kind of setting him up and giving him looks, I think it's something that could work out well.
There's a lot of fireworks that are happening, Michael, in the NBA right now. Porzingis' name. If you're the Sixers, what is your best package if you are willing to offer something to New York?
That's tough, Mike, because at that point, a lot of the discussions have been, that have been seen. I think you have to, reach into the bag of already established assets that we have. If that would mean having to potentially get rid of a guy like Dario. But I think obviously the future first-round pick, whether that be our own or whichever one doesn't convey to the Celtics, I think is probably the best asset at this point for a guy like Porzingis, who would obviously be worth cashing in some of these chips for. So, I think the best that the Sixers could probably offer would have to be something along the lines of, maybe Dario, a future first from the Kings or whichever one doesn't convey, and then one of their own future first, whether that be in maybe 2019 or 2020, something like that. Whether that would be enough to budge the Knicks is yet to be seen, but I think adding Porzingis is certainly something that would be worth looking into, at least for the team.
Yeah, I think. If it was Dario as the main piece, and as much as I think a lot of people like Dario, you got to make that flop, right?
Yeah, I think you have to, and that would be tough, like you said, especially after kind of how Dario endeared himself to Philly fans after just one season. But I think Porzingis is a guy with just a higher ceiling than Dario, especially in today's NBA. Just almost just by his size, the length advantage that he has over Dario, and how he's able to, at his size, over 7 feet, kind of is a better shooter than Dario. I think he's just, really a perfect fit for today's NBA. And, pairing him along with Joel in the front court would be a nightmare for the opposition. So if the opportunity presented itself, it'd be really, a tough situation to have to part ways with Dario. But I think at that point, you would have to do it.
How real do you think the Knicks are in wanting to trade? I don't see it happening at all. I think it's just like a slap on the wrist for him for missing, just trying to, just kind of try to prove a point a little bit to him.
Yeah, you would have to think that they would have to be, pretty crazy to try to look to. He's really the one bright spot that organization has had over the past 2 years to kind of point to for the future amidst, all the kind of chaos that has been going on with that organization. But, at the same time, at this point, considering all that's been going on, you can't really put anything past the Knicks. Obviously, Porzingis and Phil are not seeing eye to eye. So, I don't think that he's going to get moved. I think that would be a huge mistake on Phil's part. I'm sure that whoever he has in his ear would let him know that. But it will be interesting to keep an eye on. Going forward now, he's already 2 years into a rookie deal. This year will be his third. And then, it's usually after that third year where a player is going to be coming up on his expiring contract the next year, where teams start to really consider potentially making a move. And if the Knicks, don't think that Porzingis is long for New York, they could, these talks could be brought up again in the future. So I don't expect him to go anywhere tomorrow night, but it's definitely, a situation for the Sixers to keep an eye on moving forward.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think that Porzingis is going to go anywhere. I think the Knicks, I don't know, maybe they just are bored. They want to make some news, right?
Yeah, something
like that. What about Paul George, man? I don't think the Sixers get involved there, but puts the Pacers in a really bad spot.
Yeah, at this point, I think they have to, move on from Paul basically, as quickly as they can. He's, told them that basically he doesn't plan to come back. So I think they are, basically looking to kind of unload him for as much as they can, as quickly as they can. There doesn't seem to be much opportunity for the Sixers to get involved in there, but, it could certainly have ramifications for the teams around them depending on where he goes. So that'll certainly be another huge storyline for the offseason.
Do you like Butler? I mean, if he came to Philly, would you have been a fan of that move?
Yeah, I'm a fan of Jimmy Butler. That's another guy that I think would have fit in pretty nicely, right in between Embiid and Simmons there. If it came down to, there was a report, I don't know if it's ever been substantiated, that the Sixers turned down a potential offer for Butler in order to pursue Fultz. And in that situation, I don't think I necessarily blame them for that. You're looking at, obviously a guy in Jimmy Butler who's already 28 and established, as opposed to, a guy that they think can be a perennial all-star point guard that's on basically the same age, development schedule as their other young guys. But, outside of that, I do think as far as big-name veterans, Butler would be at the top of the list of guys that, if available, the Sixers, should try to bring in. I think he would, defensively fit real well on the perimeter of this team. He would play kind of that style of ball that Brett, kind of emphasizes, that pace, space, and defense. Those are really, something Butler is kind of, known for. So I do think that he would be a nice fit in Philly if it was, an option that was available.
If when July 1 comes around, they're going to add Fultz, obviously, on Thursday night. Ben Simmons, Joel, Dario, Robert Covington, Bayless. A lot of people forget about him, Michael. Bayless is going to be a big addition. Do you see one guy in free agency that they should target that makes a lot of sense?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, obviously, one that's been heavily mentioned was J.J. Redick. I do think that would definitely make some sense as a guy that's, basically just a spot-up shooter. Could really space the floor, play off the ball, but not need the ball in his hands. Obviously with Fultz and Simmons, in the roster last year, that's going to be a couple guys that will have the ball in their hands mostly. So guys that could, really get their own by coming off screens, running offenses, catching, shooting, and spacing the floor, I think is, definitely an ideal skill set that they should be looking for. So, I mean, obviously JJ would be one. We had the report that they would be potentially interested in Patty Mills this offseason, which I think, even with Fultz coming in, I think that's a potential guy that they could look for. In Patty, you could have a guy that could play off ball, off of Fultz, kind of split the backcourt there, play as a shooting guard if necessary. And then, there's obviously some other guys, that they could potentially look at. You're talking about, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope from the Pistons, who's a restricted free agent, Otto Porter from Washington. Those are a couple guys that will be commanding a little bit bigger of a payday. I'm not sure if the Sixers would be interested in kind of shelling out what they would be commanding on the market, but basically just that skill set, perimeter players that are, really capable of shooting. It sounds simple enough, but, the team at this point, they just need to add guys that can space the floor and play defense.
Yeah. Obviously, Okafor. Who's another guy on this roster that could potentially get dealt?
I think Nick Stauskas could potentially get moved this year. I feel like his role is going to be slightly marginalized in the coming year. with just with the additions that the team has made and how the roster's filled out. I'm not sure exactly where his role would fit in. I hate to say it, and I don't think he's going to get moved, but I think that Robert Covington is another guy. Obviously, he only has 1 year remaining on his current deal right now, which is somewhat of a red flag to other teams. But there's certainly been teams across the league that have taken note of Covington's development over the past year into a really solid two-way forward in this league. And I think that there would be a handful of teams that would be really interested in acquiring his services. So I mean, if it came down to if the Sixers were involved in in some sort of a conversation, a dialogue for a trade for something that they wanted, and Covington was something that was asked for by the opposing team. If it came down to it, I think that he could be moved. I don't think he will. I don't want him to be, but that's one guy on the roster other than the obvious big three of Simmons and Embiid and Okafor that will draw some value across the league.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm looking at obviously they have TJ, Bayless, Luwawu, Stauskas, Gerald Henderson. I'm trying to figure out how those guys are all getting minutes in there, with Ben Simmons and Fultz probably getting a majority of the backcourt minutes.
Right, and that's the thing. I feel like some of those guys, their roles that they might have had last year are definitely going to be marginalized to an extent this year. Especially we don't know if Furkan Korkmaz is going to come over, which is another would be another guy potentially competing for a wing spot there. So I do think that between all those guys you just mentioned, obviously Justin Anderson, another wing player that they got last year for Netherlands. I don't think that all of those guys will be around come the start of the season. So whether it be in a trade or something else on draft night, I think those are all viable options to get moved. It's just a matter none of those guys necessarily has a very high value market wise across the league. So it's a matter of what they can get for who.
Yeah, and you could see a scenario, I guess, where you have Bayless and Fultz and Simmons on the floor. Because of Simmons' size, you can probably add a 3 quote-unquote guard look back there. I mean, so Bayless would be the one, I think, that will get some more extended time than maybe some of the other guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Like as you said, I think some people tend to forget about Bayless's presence on the roster right now, just simply because he was basically MIA with the injury all of last season. But I don't necessarily expect him to start. Obviously, I think they'll want to put Fultz out there right away, but I think Bayless will be the backup guard off the bench, and he gives them versatility and kind of the way that you just said is he can play off ball, especially if they have Fultz and Simmons out there. Simmons, a guy that's capable of playing at a few different spots. He could bump down to a forward spot next to Covington and a big, whether it be Embiid, and then you have Bayless and Fultz in the backcourt. Bayless is a guy that can play both on and off ball. So I definitely expect his role to be definitely obviously expanded from last season, but I think he's a guy that could give the team 20 to 25 minutes a game next year for sure.
We're talking with Michael Kaskey-Blomain. Before we run here, are you sure of what the picks that they gave to Boston? Are they still they can't do anything with them, right? Like, are they locked in now? Like, you couldn't trade the LA pick or either of the 19 picks, can you?
You know what, Mike? That's a great question. To be honest with you, I don't know the exact answer to that. I don't think so. I think since those picks are involved in the swap with the Celtics, I think they're kind of in a holding period until one shakes out. So they would probably be limited to moving their own future first round picks if that were the case.
But even in the 19 one, it's kind of in a holding pattern, right? Because it's depending on which is better, the Kings or their own pick.
Right.
So essentially,
they would have to look all the way out to 2020
right,
or 2018
or next year, their own
right.
pick. Right. So they don't really have as much ammunition to make moves with picks in the next 2 seasons, maybe, as we would anticipate. If in fact, now somebody said to me that you could trade the opposite of the protections with those picks. In other words, you could trade the Lakers pick, but give up 1 6 through 30. But not 2 through 5. You know what I mean? I'm not sure that that's correct or not, but I don't really know how that works with those picks that are kind of in limbo at this point. Because I have seen people suggest that they package, somebody with one of these picks, and I'm not sure you can even do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I would definitely need to get a quick contract refresher on that. But it would make sense if they could, flip the opposite of the protection, since it's only guaranteed to go to a team if it falls within the certain picks. It would make sense that they could do that. But again, I'm not completely sure about that.
All right, tomorrow should be interesting. Tomorrow night, the Sixers will have Markelle Fultz in the fold. He'll play Summer League. Ben Simmons will not. Embiid will not. But then the free agent period opens up on July 1st, and we'll